Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel for another midweek mystery. This week we're covering the case of Nicky Verstappen, one of the most prolific criminal cases to ever happen in the Netherlands. Nicky was murdered in 1998, and after 20 years, just last month, they finally caught his killer. Now, as a general rule, I try to avoid covering the more recent cases on this topic. I generally look for cases that are sort of 4 or 5 years or older, just because I find newer cases can be quite volatile, and I like to be able to tell you the story all the way through to the end, or I do mystery, so as far as we can. But I've had so many requests to cover the case of Nicky that I thought I'd try something a little bit different. I am going to title this case a solved case, but it's worth bearing in mind that this hasn't gone to trial yet, so there's still a chance, albeit probably a slim chance, that this person could be found not guilty. But I'm pretty sure that after 20 years, they finally have found Nicky's killer. Of course, this case being from the Netherlands, most of the sources are in Dutch. There is very limited English information about this case online, but I've done my best. I have relied heavily on Google Translate for this, so if any of the points seem to be a little bit off, then please feel free to correct me in the comments down below. Also, a huge apology to the Dutch for my horrific butchering of the Dutch language in this. I can't even begin to take a guess at how some of these words are pronounced, so please excuse me. I'm going to be talking with an English accent all the way through. So Nicky Verstappen was born on the 13th of March 1987, making him just 11 years old when he died on the 10th of August 1998. On Saturday the 8th of August 1998, Nicky and 36 other children took a bus from Heibloem. I'm going to put all the words I don't really know how to pronounce down here so you can at least see them. Heibloem to Buxom for a children's summer camp. This summer camp was taking place on the Decay summer camping grounds. I don't know what I'm going to do with any of these words. I am so sorry. It had taken a lot of courage for Nicky to go to camp that year. Just the previous year he'd been signed up for the same summer camp, and he'd actually pulled out at the last minute because he was so nervous, he was scared he'd be homesick, and so he didn't go. So I think in 1998 he was so extra determined to make it happen. Even when his best friend pulled out at the very last minute, and I'm talking like literally as they were getting on the bus, his best friend pulled out, Nicky still wanted to go. After the bus arrived at the camping ground, the children spent the first couple of days just doing their regular summer camp activities. Each night they'd retire to bed at around 10 PM, and they were sleeping in tents, like army style big tents, and each tent I think they're around like 6 or 7 different boys. In the early hours of the 10th of August, one of Nicky's tent mates gets up to go to the toilet, and he notices that Nicky is still there, so he was definitely in his tent at around 5 AM that morning. However, when everyone wakes up at around 9 AM, they notice that Nicky's gone. And the search begins slowly. The youth leaders who are running the camp kind of refuse to admit that they've sort of messed up with their duty of care, and they say that Nicky's just run away or he's exploring, and they just say, oh, he'll be back. Of course, he never came back, and Nicky's parents straight away knew that something was up. They knew that this wasn't like Nicky to go off wandering. He was so homesick and so nervous anyway, he wouldn't just get up and start wandering and exploring. It wasn't until the next day, so the 11th of August, that the full-scale search for Nicky really started. The police were involved, the military police, they had planes, they had people from all of the nearby villages coming in, as well as Nicky's own village coming in and searching for him. At 9 PM that night, Nicky's body is found, and he is found naked from the waist up. He's wearing his Ajax, so his Amsterdam Football Club pyjama bottoms. He's not wearing any socks, but his underwear is on. Now, a lot of the sources I read differ as to how far from the camping ground Nicky was found. Some say it was a short distance as 1/4 of a mile. Some say it was 1¼ mile. Some say 3/4. He wasn't that far. At the most, he would have been about 1.25 miles away. If this is the case, it's kind of shocking that it took almost 2 days for them to find Nicky, but he was actually hidden pretty well. He was just off of the road, but he was sort of in a pine forest, so where Christmas trees grew, hidden under the vegetation. This particular area was actually notorious in the nearby villages for being somewhere where men would meet up for gay sex. Now, there's never been an actual confirmation as to how Nicky's died. In all of the articles I've read, it says that the police don't know how he died. There wasn't ever a proper cause of death confirmed. Personally, I do find this a little bit hard to believe. I've never read a case where they haven't been able to figure out how they died. Maybe that is the case. Maybe the police really don't know what happened to him. But I do suspect that maybe the police do know more than they're letting on here, and maybe they're holding that piece of information back. A second investigation into the case a couple of years later said that it was likely that Nicky was drugged, but I still don't think this was put down as an actual hard cause of death. It's estimated that he died around 2 p.m. on the 10th of August, but later investigations said that it could have been as late as 9 a.m. on the 11th of August, so we really don't have a solid amount of time here. What was clear though was that Nicky had been sexually assaulted, but once again the police have kept their cards close to their chest and they've never revealed how exactly they know this detail. What the police have made clear is that they have DNA on Nicky's pyjama bottoms that is not from Nicky. They are in no doubt whatsoever that the DNA they found belongs to Nicky's killer, and they've said this from day one. Now, a lot of sources said there was actually blood spatter that they found on his trousers, like very minute blood drops, but a lot of sources also said they've never said what the DNA is, so I'm really not sure what to believe there. But there's clearly something about this detail which leads police to believe that 100% this DNA belongs to the killer. They said that it's not the kind of DNA that can get there innocently. But this wasn't the only DNA they found in the vicinity of Nicky's body. Like I mentioned earlier, this area was notorious for being a gay sex meetup place. They found lots of items near Nicky, and all of these items had DNA on them. One of them was a tissue with some sperm in it, but this didn't match up to the DNA found on Nicky. But the police still wanted to talk to these people, talk to whoever's DNA this was, just so they could rule them out. Honestly, in everything that I read, I'm really not sure if the police ever found these people or not. No dirt was found on the soles of Nicky's feet, leading the police to believe that he hadn't walked far when he was grabbed, and he certainly didn't walk to that location himself. So somebody had placed him there, and they'd placed him there once he was dead. I couldn't find much information or even speculation online as to how people think Nicky ended up from being asleep in his tent to being taken and murdered by someone. I mean, I doubt somebody actually came into his tent and took him when there were several other boys asleep. So Nicky must have got out of his tent at one point. Maybe he got up himself to go to the toilet. Maybe this information just got lost in translation somewhere, so if any of you from the Netherlands actually know this piece of information, then I'd really like it if you would share with us down below. Police, of course, secured the crime scene and started to interview lots of different people in the area. They noted down anyone passing by, and anybody who walked near the area, they would later go on and interview them. And they also notified the German authorities of this because this camping ground was very, very close to the German border. So it was highly likely that if somebody had committed murder, they would have tried to escape over the border. There were a few people who were immediate suspects here, and between December 1999 and January 2000, 35 men took part in DNA testing. So the police, I assume these people were sort of suspects in the case, or people who had histories of sexual assault and things like that in the area, but none of these people flagged any kind of match. Now, it's worth saying here that in 1998, although DNA technology was very much available, it wasn't that good, and so they couldn't do much with the DNA with the information that they had. They could do very basic testing, and I don't think the DNA that they managed to pull from pyjama trousers was particularly strong. A hair was found in the boot of one of the camp workers' cars, and obviously this was taken off testing, and it was proven not to be Nicky's. So they were really looking under every nook and cranny trying to find anything that could lead them to Nicky's killer. But in hindsight, the police have been very much criticised for how they dealt with the investigation in the early days. A lot of the public say that more people should have been stopped and questioned in the few days after Nicky's death, and that the police just weren't harsh enough on people. To the public, there was one very obvious suspect in this case. The man who was running the camp where Nicky was staying was a man called Yost Breck. He had founded the camp quite a few years beforehand, and he was actually a former headmaster at a local school. And he was actually a suspect due to an incident that happened just the week before Nicky died at the camp. On the 5th of August, a 15-year-old girl was at the camp, and she complained to camp leaders that she just wasn't feeling too great. I think she had a bit of a headache. And so they gave her a sleeping pill. She wakes up the next morning in the staff tent, having no memory of getting there, with a lot of abdominal pain, and she suspected that she'd been raped, and she thought that she'd been raped by Yost Breck. I can't tell you exactly why this girl suspected Yost over anyone else. I'm sure there's more details to it, but like I mentioned, a lot of these things just get lost in translation. But also apparently on the day that Nicky disappeared, Barton was acting very strangely. He left the camp for hours and he was very sketchy about his whereabouts. However, in 2001 a sort of further investigation was done and it came out that Barton was actually never a suspect here. The police never looked at him for a second because apparently he had a rock solid alibi. So Yost Barton actually died a few years later in 2003. However, in 2010, once the technology was up to scratch, they actually exhumed his body and they tested the DNA found on Nicky's pyjamas to Barton's DNA and it came back as not a match. And this really threw people because almost everyone thought that Yost Barton was the person who did this to Nicky. They had no doubt in their minds and now suddenly there was just nothing. Another major suspect was a German serial killer called Martin Ney. Now he killed 3 children and sexually assaulted at least 40. He'd break into homes, into schools, but mostly he would assault children at summer camps. You can see the obvious link here. He would also mainly target 10 or 11-year-old boys and that's exactly what Nicky was. However, he mostly attacked around North Germany, about a 4 to 6 hour drive from the camp where Nicky was staying. And once he was later caught, they admitted to pretty much all of his attacks, but he never would admit to hurting Nicky. And of course, again, we later found out that it definitely wasn't him. Shortly after the murder, Nicky's parents, Bertie and Peter Verstappen, sort of started to have their doubts that the police were actually doing as good a job as they would like them to. So they contact a journalist. This was renowned crime journalist Peter DeVries. And a lot of people attribute this case being solved purely to Peter DeVries' hard work. Over the 20 years, he has refused to let Nicky's name be forgotten. He knows if people stopped thinking about Nicky and didn't remember him anymore, then this case would never ever be solved. So for 20 years, he has done articles and interviews. He has been the shoulder to cry on for both of Nicky's parents. He says over the years he's taken over 1,000 calls from them and he would do it 10 times over. Like I mentioned before, Nicky was a massive fan of Ajax, the Amsterdam football club. And in his office, Peter has hanging an Ajax football shirt. He actually ordered it to go in Nicky's tomb, but it arrived too late and so he hung it in his office as a reminder and he said that he would never take it down until the day that Nicky's case has been solved. And even now we think it's most likely been solved. He said that he's going to keep it there just as a tribute to Nicky. Thanks to the help of Peter, the reward for any information leading to an arrest in this case rose from 250,000 guilders to 500,000. It was also Peter that fought for the DNA testing project that would eventually lead to the capture of Nicky's killer. He knew that as DNA techniques improved, more information could be extracted from the DNA found on Nicky's pyjama bottoms and more could be done with that information. In 2005, they began looking at this DNA again and in 2008, they actually found a usable piece of DNA, a strong piece of evidence. This piece of DNA was compared to literally everyone who came into contact with Nicky that day, all of the people who shared his tent, all of the children at the camp, anybody that he would have spoken to that day, they compared the DNA and it didn't match anyone. So it had to be that of the killer. They run this through the national database, but it doesn't yield any match at all. In 2012, a new cold case team takes on Nicky's case and they aren't intending to reopen the investigation and look at it from the very beginning, but they're a fresh pair of eyes. But just for a moment, we're going to talk about another case quickly, and this is the rape and murder of a 16-year-old girl called Marianne Vastra in 1999. For years and years, Marianne's case went completely unsolved. The police had DNA, they had DNA from a cigarette lighter found at the scene, but they couldn't do anything with this. However, in 2012, they begin a DNA project. They voluntarily take DNA from 8,000 men in a 5-kilometre radius of where Marianne was murdered. They were looking for a familial match. They were using kinship technology, so if any of these men were related to the killer, it would flag up. And actually, the actual man who did the murder let himself be tested for this voluntarily. He knew that it would come up as a match, but he knew that if he didn't do it, one of his cousins would, and he'd be caught anyway. He was sent to jail for 18 years. And around this same time, in 2012, a man called Yost Breck starts training himself in bushcraft. Now you're probably wondering why this technique couldn't be used straight away in Nicky's case, and like I mentioned before, it was just a lack of technology. All of the investigators knew that eventually the technology would allow them to do something like this, but the DNA wasn't that strong and they just didn't have the means. But eventually this year in January 2018, they finally knew that they were able to do this. In January, it was announced that 21,500 men in Limburg, the area in which Nicky disappeared, would be asked to give voluntary DNA samples. In the end, I think 14,000 men voluntarily provided samples, and this was kind of enough for them to get a real sort of sample of the area. And this was the largest DNA project to ever happen in the Netherlands. Of all of these 14,000 men who came forward, one of them, of course, was related to the killer. So the police start looking into the family tree, and they notice that a man called Yost Breck has actually recently been reported missing by his family. And the police find this interesting because he never volunteered his DNA for this. Yost Breck was a man who had fully trained himself in bushcraft, and he was an expert at surviving in the wilderness. He apparently started to train himself around the time that the DNA project for Marianne's death was done. This is a man who knew this was coming and was thinking ahead. He'd left the Netherlands the previous October and was living in France. And he'd actually stayed in contact with his family up until around February, when he told them that he was going hiking in the mountains. And then they didn't hear from him again, and in April they actually reported him as missing. So police go to Yost's home in eastern France and see that he's actually been gone from there for 4 months. He is completely off the grid. They take DNA from his pyjamas, and of course, as you can probably guess, it was 100% matched to the DNA found on Nicky. So now they had their man, they knew who they needed to arrest. They just had to find him. And this is a man who was an expert at surviving in the wilderness. He could have been literally anywhere. Turns out that 55-year-old Breck had lived very close to the area where Nicky had gone missing from. And he was actually stopped by police in the days after Nicky died. But he was just put down as a passerby. He was fully questioned and everything, and they just let him go. Breck also had a history of sexual abuse, and when I read this out to you, you are not going to believe it. So although the details are quite hard to find for this online, it's actually suspected that in 1985, 22-year-old Breck is a suspect in a sexual abuse case where 4 boys were abused in Limburg. And apparently he confessed to this. He confessed to the police and said, yep, I did it. But he was never arrested, and I find this absolutely insane. Now this happened in 1985, so 13 years before Nicky went missing, and it actually turns out that the public prosecutors have to destroy files after a certain number of years, especially if the person isn't convicted. So the reason the police probably didn't flag this up straight away when they first interviewed him is probably because he actually didn't appear on any system. I would love to know more of the details about this case, why he wasn't ever arrested after he confessed. It's very, very strange. I can't even confirm to you 100% that it happened because, like I said, there's no public records of it, but I saw it mentioned in a lot of articles online. So a Europe-wide hunt for Breck begins, and the Dutch police are obviously working very close with the French police in this because that's where he's last known to have been. Photos of Breck were released to the public, and this is where Peter's hard work of not letting Nicky be forgotten for all those years really comes in handy. Everyone felt so personally connected to Nicky Verstappen, and they just wanted to get justice. Everyone felt so strongly about this. So even people who weren't living in the Netherlands at the time, they were still obviously looking at the news, and the first face people were seeing on the news was Yost Breck, the man who killed Nicky Verstappen. So everyone was on the lookout. And then a Dutch man living in a town called Castellsol near Barcelona, it's about 50 kilometers away from Barcelona, contacts the police. He says that he actually knows where Yost Breck is, and he is 100% sure it's him, and they've spoken face to face multiple times. Breck is actually living in a tent next to a commune house in the town. So on August 26, 2018, if you're watching this the day that I put it up, it's exactly a month ago today, Yost Breck is arrested in Spain on suspicion of the sexually motivated killing of Nicky Verstappen. They catch him as he's walking to get chopped wood, and they force him down onto the dirt ground, and he's put in jail in Spain. He was extradited to the Netherlands on September 6th, where he currently faces charges of sexual assault, kidnapping and murder. To make this case even more chilling, Yost Breck was actually a Boy Scout leader, and he worked for a long amount of time in a kindergarten. He was around young boys for most of his life. From here, Breck will go to trial and hopefully be charged. The police are 100% sure this is their guy, and they are 100% sure that the DNA that they found on Nicky belonged to the killer. Even though they've never released exactly why they think this, they've always said, like, without a doubt, this is the guy. They've never released all of the details of this crime. It's still sketchy as to exactly what condition Nicky's body was in, how he died, the sexual assault, all of that. So we can only assume that the police are holding back all of this information for a reason, and this is all going to come out in court, and it's all going to pin on Yost Breck. I mean, personally for me, the DNA just doesn't seem like quite enough, so I'm assuming that they've got more. They wouldn't spend millions of public money on this DNA sweep if they weren't sure that it would get them the right guy. Breck might fully confess once he's interrogated, or maybe he's already been interrogated. He's been back in the Netherlands for about 2-3 weeks now. And there hasn't been any news since he was extradited back to the Netherlands. There's no more recent articles on what exactly is going on. Police have always been pretty certain that Nicky was sexually assaulted, even though they've never told us why they are so sure of that. Maybe they have some semen or something. And to be honest, if this semen matches the DNA and they can't even get him on murder, they can at least get him on sexual assault on a minor. But to be honest, if they've got this, I think they'll probably get him for murder. My gut feeling here says they've got the right guy. The DNA evidence, Breck's past crimes, the fact that he took up bushcraft, and the fact that he escaped and he didn't come forward as soon as his name was all over the Dutch media. I'm pretty sure this is the guy. He knew what he was doing and he knew he needed to get out of the country. Now we just wait for the trial and hope that Nicky's parents get the justice they deserve. I'm very, very interested to keep up to date with this. I can't wait to see what happens in court, what more details come out. And I'm really intrigued to hear what you guys think of this. I know it's a little bit different. I don't usually like to do cases where they just kind of stop and there's going to be more that's going on. So if you want me to do a catch-up case on this in a few months' time or whenever the trial is, then let me know. Give me feedback on this. Let me know what you think of this kind of format. And let me know if you'd like to see more of these really, really current cases, as in the ones that are happening right now. Yeah, I'm open to suggestions, let me know. And before I sign off in this case, I just want to do a quick little bit of admin and give you some important information. So this time next week, I will not be uploading a mystery video because on Monday I've got a very exciting announcement, also I think it's an exciting announcement, and I want to spend a week focusing on that. I haven't skipped a mystery video in a long time, so I do hope you guys can let me off for just 1 week. But to make up for it, I do have a video coming out on Saturday. It is the first in a new series I'm doing on my channel. I don't think I've mentioned it on my channel. I think I've just put it on Twitter, which I'll put here by the way. I am doing a new series called Serial Killer Spotlight. On the last Saturday of every month, I'm going to be uploading a video about a serial killer, and the first serial killer I'm doing Saturday, you can probably guess, is one that I'm very excited to cover. It's the case that got me interested in true crime, and that'll be up 4:30 Saturday the 29th of September, so keep an eye out for that. But yeah, that's everything. I'd love to hear all your feedback on this case. I really hope Nicky's parents get the justice they deserve on this. It's been a very long 20 years for them, and I will see you in my next video. Bye guys.